Hi everyone. Really pleased to say we've got Chris Pipe with us today. Chris has experiences in both the men's and the women's game, having started off at Arsenal's academy, working with the boys as a goalkeeper coach. He's now transitioned to working with the women's game, where he's worked with Tottenham Hotspur, the FA, and in his current role with West Ham United. So I'll hand over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Billy. Yeah, it's a pleasure to present some of the stuff that I'm going to be discussing and gain some thoughts of the coaches and people listening. Essentially, some of the things, kind of what Billy spoke about in terms of my role. One of the big things that I've been looking at is in terms of the impact of defending set plays within the WSL and the impact that that could have on team performance and potentially league position. And so I kind of first, obviously, Billy kind of alluded to it as well in terms of my coaching background. Started from the boys' side, working in academies, predominantly Arsenal, working from under nines all the ways up to the 21s and 23s for a period of 3, 4 years. Then I got an opportunity to work with Tottenham Hotspur women in terms of the first team, which was obviously a great opportunity within the WSL. From there, working with England women under 23s, helping support the depth chart and the relationship with the seniors and some coach developer roles within that. And then I've been in my current post with West Ham women for the past 18 months now, potentially. Time flies when you're in football. And yeah, it's a great experience to be back in the WSL and working with that in terms of my current role. Now, obviously, in terms of my current role, I am goalkeeping coach in terms of my job title, but within that, there's obviously multitude of roles and responsibilities that I have. So, obviously, the main one is the goalkeeping coach and responsible for the goalkeepers in terms of their loans and their program throughout day to day. Obviously, the other big role is set play coach, which we're going to go through in terms of part of some of the research that we've looked at. I also do things like unit delivery, take part in opposition analysis, match day logistics. So, especially with the analysis process, it includes kind of in-depth profiling opposition, goalkeepers to obviously help the formation and the game plan and trying to support our team in the preparation for the forthcoming matches, essentially. So it's kind of where it's kind of come to in the conversation that we've had with Billy and the research that I've done that I've recently just finished a dissertation from St Mary's, and essentially the dissertation was to investigate the impact of defending set plays, specifically on corners and free kicks, on team performance within the WSL. And I've based it over the last 3 seasons. And I think the reason for doing so was there was just an emphasis linked to obviously my current role and my own self-development and understanding, and then trying to start a process where someone can pick up and challenge and go further with it, essentially. As you talk about set plays in the men's games, there's videos, there's research, there's articles, but actually in terms of the women's game, there is a big gap around what that looks like. And I just wanted to delve a little bit into that and see if there was an impact specifically around the defending set plays and the league's, the team performance and an overall league position, essentially.
Great. And just on that one, Chris, just really interested to hear why you specifically wanted to focus on the impact of defending set plays rather than attacking set plays.
Yeah, I kind of stumbled on it actually. Obviously, we have data, things like StatsBomb, FBref, Scout that provide all of that. And when we were looking at our defending set plays, and it was back when I was at Tottenham 3, 4 years ago, there was a correlation between we were fifth in terms of defending set plays, and we finished fifth in the league at that time. And it started probably just a coincidence that you just started to look a little bit further at other teams and what that might look like. And then I kind of left it for a period of time, obviously changing roles. And then when I had my dissertation, I thought it was something that I wanted to pick up. But when I looked at the attacking set play stats, there wasn't anything really that stood out around that made me think, actually, I want to go into that a little bit deeper. I'm hoping that the dissertation that I've done, people will then pick up attacking set plays, or I can look at it further, or throw ins, because obviously there's a whole multitude of what defending set plays could look like. But the focus being specifically on corners and free kicks in this instance. So kind of where it started was I wanted to look at the in possession restarts in the game. So kind of an average WSL game over a period of season. Just wanting to look at all the restarts that might happen. Obviously, we're focusing on defensive set plays and what they look like. But if you think there was 46 restarts per 90 on average, from throw-ins, from corners, from free kicks. So potentially 46 restarts that you can have a defending opportunity to have. And that was that was something that I picked up and just thought that was quite an interesting stat and something that we don't really think about from a defending perspective as well as an attacking perspective as well. So what I started to do was I started to pick up in terms of just some basic set play stats and looking at the seasons. And I think if you look at the top table, it shows that the total number of goals in the WSL per season and then the goals from set plays. So it averages over 20%. So essentially 1 in every 5 is a set play goal from either a corner or a free kick. And I think just to note in terms of the way the data was done is that the corners and free kicks were when the team were in a defensive setup. So it was a balanced setup and they were ready to defend that. And I think what was interesting as well is that from these set plays, again, we can go further around in swinging deliveries, short corners, and really delve into that further. And then when I started to pick up that actually when you break down the set play goals itself, that corners had a high percentage of those set play goals. So averaging over 70% of the set play goals were from corners. And then if you think from goals from free kicks, there was an average of about 26-27% of those from free kicks. So a large proportion from goals from corners. And then those goals from free kicks didn't include direct free kicks. They were literally wide free kicks that were delivered into a box when a team has a balanced and defensive setup. So if you think about that from a defending perspective, that if 1 in every 5 goals you're going to concede maybe from a set play, you've got to make sure that you do it right. And I think the biggest thing to take into account from the WSL is that there is a difference in terms of the top 4, top 3 teams to teams below in terms of budgets or what that might look like. And actually, if you play a Man City, Chelsea, or Arsenal, you're probably going to defend a high percentage of set plays more than what you would do against other teams that may be, in your quality range, if you like, if that makes sense. So I think that was just quite interesting to note from a start point.
Yeah, really interesting there, Chris, in terms of the data that you've got for percentage of goals scored from set plays. When I did some similar research for the Training Ground Guru webinar, we looked at percentage of goals scored from set plays from the top 5 leagues in the men's game. It came out nearly exactly the same as what you've got there. So 20% of goals are scored from set plays, or 1 in 5 goals are from set plays.
Yeah, and I think that was really interesting, and that was something that I wanted to look at. Is obviously where all the data and articles around the men's game. There obviously is a gender disparity around what that looks like and how we can manage that. As obviously in the women's game, you can get severe height differences. So a player could be 5'4", marking a player that's 5'8", 5'9". Where in the men's game, I'm not sure, again, without doing extended research, but I'm not sure that gap, is as much in terms of from a physical perspective in terms of what it would be for the women. So in the men's, it could be around clever free kicks and so on, which obviously can happen in the women's game. But, is it a case of actually just using physical superiority around what that looks like and managing that piece? Because that could be a bigger element instead of creating a quick and clever free kick, essentially. So these are things that I think the dissertation can help with and evolve and how you can create maybe numerical superiority in certain ways to obviously benefit the physical attributes of the team, potentially. And then vice versa from a defensive perspective as well to obviously help us aid that. So where I kind of started was kind of a basic format. So essentially the table here, this is from 2021-22. On the left, it shows the team's defending set plays. So again, from corners and free kicks only. So it shows the number of goals that they conceded, the number of set play goals, and the percentage of the set play goals that they conceded. On the right was the team's final league position. So just a couple of interesting things to look at in terms of the first one was that the top 4 teams that conceded the least amount of set play goals finished in the top 4. You then also had West Ham that only conceded 5 set play goals and finished 6th in the league. And then interestingly, you look at the bottom 2 teams in terms of Birmingham and Leicester conceded the most set play goals and finished in the bottom 2. And then you got Everton that were close behind in terms of 7 goals, finishing 10th as well. So then that got me thinking again. I was like, oh, actually, is there something else behind that? So let's go to the league position and do the same for next year. So in terms of the following year, exactly the same format. So you're looking at, again, Chelsea just conceding 1 set play goal for the whole season. A little bit closer here towards the bottom. So it started to narrow up in terms of the team's defensive capabilities. But then some of the things were exactly the same. So you see the top 4 who conceded the least amount of set plays are the top 4 teams. You then see Everton again, who had a really good element in defending just five, conceding just five and finishing sixth, which was a massive jump from the season before. And then again, you have the team that finished bottom, Brighton, that concede 10, which are joint, finishing in the bottom two again. So it's kind of just in things to think about. And then last season, same. You can start to see the amount of set play goals conceded. And quite interestingly, this time Chelsea conceded the highest amount that they have done in the past 3 seasons and won the league on goal difference, essentially. It was really tight. So essentially, could that have cost them in terms of the goals because of how much they've conceded from set plays based on a percentage overall? And then you start to see some comparisons again, where you see the top four teams. This time it's Liverpool. So for the first time in 3 seasons, Liverpool in the top four and Man United aren't. And is that because, again, Liverpool's set play goals that they've conceded are really good and on par with Arsenal and Chelsea and so on and competing? And then the bottom two teams are the teams that concede the most set plays. So there's always some anomalies in these middle gaps, and there are teams that do that. You can see here Everton only conceding five, finishing eighth in the league, but you can see some real commonalities around the top four, the bottom two, and what that looks like, and the percentage of set play goals they conceded, and the importance of those essentially.
Just on that one, Chris, obviously you touched on at the start of the presentation about how your role sort of encompasses multiple um, multiple things, if you like, in terms of opposition analysis as well as set play analysis. Is there anything you've picked up on that you think might be the reason why these teams have done consistently well over the last few years?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think part of the dissertation was to go over that, and there'll be loads more within it. I think partly a factor as well we have to look at in terms of the number of set plays that are defended, because Chelsea, Manchester City, Arsenal concede the least amount of set plays throughout the season. So obviously you concede less. There's going to be less opportunities for you to concede, and the teams towards the bottom obviously conceding more within that. So that's understandable. However, what you do look at is in terms of the percentage of goals that they concede from set plays. So you look at Chelsea here in this instance, they would have had less set plays to defend than Bristol City, but Bristol City had a better percentage in terms of the amount of goals that they conceded. So that was one factor that we looked at. I also looked at in terms of like zonals and player to player systems. There was a broad mix within that in terms of 50% of the teams would defend with 4 zonals and more. Where in the men's game, my understanding from a Premier League perspective, the higher percentage is around 5 zonal markers. That is kind of a preference. So quite interestingly, why is there a difference? What does that look like? Is it because of physical attributes, type of delivery, and those sorts of aspects? And then
Yeah.
also we looked at percentages of clearances from the box. So from a first contact perspective, from a defending team, what percentage of clearances clear the box on first contact? And looking at that, it was just averaging over 50% in the women's game that would clear the box from a first contact, which means that essentially half your corners are staying in your box after a first contact. So does that help me from an attacking perspective to think about what the second phase looks like? But it also helps me from a defending perspective to think where I might need players to pick that up after the first contact, if that makes sense.
And yeah, really interesting there in terms of talking about clearing the box. Would do you think it would be right to assume that obviously the difference in physicality and power and stuff within the men's game, i.e., um, quicker, faster deliveries, stronger players to clear the ball? Like, do you think there's probably a higher percentage of clearances go outside of the box in the men's game, as where in the women's perhaps, it's harder
Yeah,
for the defensive team to clear the ball so far?
yeah, potentially. Obviously, I don't know the stats for the men's game of what it looks like for the women's. It could be similar, and then we're having that conversation. But I think the great thing about me doing this is then poses those questions. So hopefully we'll pick that up from what I would want to do and anyone else that you work with. And hopefully somebody else in the WSL might pick that up further and challenge it further and go further. And then it might look like it in the men's, if that makes sense. Where, from a men's perspective, you see teams like Brentford that will have 10 players up. In the women's game, that never happens. Now, is that because of just defensive security or better data around what the benefits might be in that? And that's something that I've looked at is, could that be a benefit or could it be a hindrance because it is the women's game, not the men's game? And what does that look like? So the big reason I think like around doing this as well was to create that difference between the men's and women's game and create a bespoke bit of literature and research that was specific to them. You can have similarities, but there are massive differences in both games essentially. And then in terms of ultimately, like I said, in terms of the dissertation, and happy to share that as well. I think, like I've been saying, the purpose was just to fill the gap in terms of some academic literature regarding the defensive strategies employed within the WSL, and then trying to highlight the differences between the men's and women's football that could include physical attributes, intensity, tactical approaches, like we've said, and then suggest that strategies that's effective in the men's game may not be directly transferable to the women's game, and trying to create our own bespoke route of what it looks like within the women's game, not just because we've seen the men's do it, let's copy that. Does it fit all of those attributes of our team, our player profiling, and so on, and create that bespoke strategy effectively. And then ultimately what the purpose was, and the findings was trying to create some insights that can inform staff, coaches around the importance of that defending set play. We can clearly see that there is a little bit of a trend around, if you can defend set plays effectively, then your league position is affected by that. We can see that. Of course, there's other attributes to that, totally understand, but I do believe that there is a big factor around having that, and having a good defensive set play strategy will keep you in games longer in the WSL, which in turn can turn 1 point to 3 points, or you're walking away with a point or not having a point, which goes a long way, especially only having 12 teams in the league. And I just think it shows that it's critical, and creating that, again, that research, that we can create that difference between the men's and the women's game, and just create some further insight and knowledge that coaches and players can all use to obviously support their approach in set plays essentially. So obviously now that that dissertation's happened, kind of wanted to share like how I would like to implement this. Some of it we would do at club, some we've done it with previous club. A lot of it's my own thoughts as well in terms of how we can integrate that, especially from a defensive perspective. So if we take all the data that we've shown, that defending set plays are really integral in terms of final league position and what that looks like. Now, obviously, in terms of set play coach role, obviously, if you're not aware and people are not aware, ultimately it's around the responsible in terms of delivery for attacking and set pieces around the game, including throw-ins, free kicks, kickoffs, and so on. As I've discussed, obviously, opposition analysis comes within that. And it's also about how we can try and integrate that in within the week, and what that looks like in a WSL club, essentially.
Just one quick question on
Yeah.
that, Chris, if you don't mind. Obviously, again, without constantly trying to compare it to the men's game, but just in, I guess, in football in general, like there's becoming more set play specific roles. So whether that's set play analysts or set play coaches, obviously there's benefits to that in terms of having more time to focus on those aspects of the game. But I guess to flip that from your point of view, because you're in everything as well as set plays, perhaps that ties everything together quite nicely. Would that be true?
Yeah, and I think it goes well into these next slides. Essentially, is that I think we don't have a specific set play coach. Obviously, that's my role. So if you like your dual rolling, and as far as I'm aware, that happens in all the WSL clubs because of, like you said, it could be income budgets in terms of where the game is. It might flip like the men's has, essentially, like they've started to evolve that, and that could well happen within the women's game. But at the moment, yeah, I think in terms of linking it all together, it's really, really important, and how we integrate that within the week. So in terms of like the set play model, of course, it involves attacking and defending set plays, and there's a multitude around that. But I think first of all, it has to link to your team's playing philosophy, because ultimately you want to try and create that consistent message throughout the whole team all the time, whether that's you're in possession, you're out of possession. So if, for example, a team wants to show inside, you might have to think about your set plays having the same philosophy and how you deal with that, because it's a constant message that is filtered throughout the week. Then obviously linked to the playing philosophy, you create your own set play philosophy. So whatever that looks like based on your physical attributes, your own personal preferences and so on, but having that clear set play philosophy is really important. You then break it down into role principles. So if we have 5 zonals, what does each zonal player do? There's a clear principle. What's the shorts role? Is it to show them inside, outside? Is it to delay? Do you send 2 out to go player for player? All those sorts of elements are then really clear, key. And I think since I've done my dissertation, the role principles and the philosophy can then obviously help in terms of some of the academic rich literature that you've been reading. But then, of course, you just need to have tactical flexibility within that. So how we can integrate that throughout the week. So I think going back to your question, Billy, I think what I wanted to show is kind of a rough idea in terms of like a pre-season flow, if you like. So the way that I would want to try and implement this, and this is something where you can call it curriculum, whatever that looks like. But throughout the weeks, you want to try and include defending set plays, attacking set plays, and throw-ins, and integrate it during your week because we don't have that individual time. Of course, you can have IDPs, you can maximize that 100%, but obviously where you're dual rolling and others have roles within that, how you integrate that within the week's really important. So just in terms of like focusing on defending set plays, this is something that I feel is important, how you get all your points across. And if you had a 7 week, 8 week, you can obviously adjust it. But the first 2 weeks would be about your structure, organization, and principles. So everyone's really clear about the roles that they need to do, what needs to happen in these moments, these scenarios. If you're structured, you're organized, you're set, you're hoping that obviously technical ability, you'll concede less set plays within that moment. You then just start to break down the themes. So things like markers, blockers, wide free kicks. What does the structure look like there? Then you start going second phases, edge players, central free kicks, zonal shorts. And again, this is a rough idea in terms of what it looks like, but you know that if you have that plan in flow, you know what week you're going to hit certain things. And you might bring one earlier, you might flip the weeks based on what the team sessions look like. But I think having this clear plan is really important, especially during preseason when you're trying to implement your ideas and back up the fact that defending set plays are important and they show that they're important because you're in the sessions with them all the time, basically. And then just to break it down further, I just did like kind of an example week, if you like. Now, this for me would be one that I think would be really important. It happens, doesn't happen because obviously lots of things, 3 games week and so on. But I just kind of wanted to template what, in my eyes, a perfect week would look like, essentially. So on Tuesday, we've written like throw-ins. So throw-ins we know are really important. It's the same in the women's games. There's stats around quick throws and the percentage of goal scoring opportunities within that. But what does that look like from a defending perspective as well? And it's how we integrate the throw-ins into like warm-ups. So if you're doing a passing pattern, can you start with a throw-in? Can you have throw-in in small-sided games? Just really trying to bed that principle in throughout. Then, for example, like on a Wednesday, you could do things like, again, throw ins in the warm up. And then you're starting to integrate defending set plays and throw ins again. Now, defending set plays for me doesn't have to be 10 minutes at the end of the session. Could it be that it's within a small sided game and you're going to focus on short play? So you're working on the 2v2s in isolation that links to your defending principles, for example. Same with the throw-ins, you'd work on your throw-in setup and what that looks like. And then, of course, post-training, you've got a little bit of individual development time. Then the next day, again, trying to implement defending set plays, but you'll do a different format. So try to keep the flow of how you're progressing, what that looks like. Can you integrate that into the 11v11? Can you integrate that if you're doing a small-sided game? What about if you're doing 2v2s, which I'm sure loads of teams do? Could you put the 2v2s in the corner of the pitch where a corner might take place? So it's really, pitch specific and really trying to integrate that. And then that would be the same as an attacking set play perspective. But I feel like if you add, especially defending set plays, as we said about the importance of those, if you start to add those throughout the week constantly, and players don't think it's just the 10 minutes at the end of the session, I do believe that you would get that buy-in, you would get that benefit, and you would see it because it's just ingrained and linked to the playing philosophy. And I think that's really important. You'd obviously need to mix the both as well, essentially.
Yeah, really great detail shown there. I guess a question I have is, firstly, how has this idea, this sort of weekly periodization you're showing here, how has this been received by the other coaches? And second question would be, obviously, it's brilliant how the set plays are integrated with the open play coaching as well. Would it be a case that you would just step in to deliver the set play aspects of those sessions?
Yeah, I think that's really important. As obviously, different staff coaches might work differently, and I think that's why this is like my ideal way. But of course, it filters as we all know in terms of football. But I think when you start to show the importance of set plays to people and why it's really important that we have to do that, it then becomes a habit that you have to do, if that makes sense. Because I think my role is really important to show people what could happen and the importance of that. And then from there, it's up to the staff and coaches to obviously implement that. And I think in terms of when we have the playing philosophy and the style, there's sometimes within sessions, like you said, where I could just step in and coach the set play if it's needed, or actually the manager or the other coach will do the same because everybody's clear on what's required at that moment. So the messaging is just really clear. And I think because you have a set play philosophy and you have a principle that's quite clear, everyone understands what that looks like, if that makes sense. And I think, not just from set plays, but in general. And no matter if I went to the men's game or went to somewhere else or did that, for me, implementing those two things gets a clear message to everybody. Players are clear, staff are clear, and what that looks like. And obviously here in terms of my current role, grateful that we implement it as much as we can, and the manager and the coach are happy for me to step in and do that. And you just have to get a flow between how much you say and coach based on the flow of the session as well, or do you just talk to one individual because it was just them that they might need to look at, and so on from there. So yeah, that flow works really well and can work really well. And I think for anybody, we've probably heard it before, especially as goalkeeping coaches, but if you want to be involved, you've got to be prepared to share your ideas, discuss why it's important, and kind of back that up essentially in terms of how you want to integrate it. And then these were just a couple of ways that we might do. You spoke obviously about myself and what that might look like, obviously, in terms of a dual role. So, in terms of like a what, who, how, if you like. So, we'll do things like player profiling, IDPs, and think about analysis. So, we might get them to watch clip back or opposition clips or our own team clips, game reviews, training reviews. And then you might work with certain individuals. We might do profile groups. So, I've done things where we just meet with the zonal players, or we just meet with the edge players, or we just meet with the short players. So you make it really specific to them. And then obviously you have team meetings that will go through opposition analysis and so on. And then the how, things like your classroom, one-to-ones, huddle, where obviously we can share clips, comment, which can be quite an easy way to do that. Most of the time, it's probably me leading it. And sometimes I would like to flip that the other way, where I would just give a player something and tell them to come back to me with the answer just to see if they gain their understanding. But I think sometimes where you move quite quickly in football, sometimes it is easier for me to say, do this, do that. But I think the player led one would be a great way to show that they're understanding of what you want from that defending set play. And then on the pitch, kind of similar things that we've discussed in terms of what it would look like. Obviously, you'd go through the defending, attacking, throw-ins, kickoffs, and what that would look like. Again, individuals, profile group. So we have done things at certain times which we try to integrate, where we might do unopposed sessions, but it's just the zonal players. So the zonals are really focusing on their starting position, the flight of the ball, the assessment of the ball. We might do some where it's just the short players, and the short players have to defend and not let it hit the target goal, for example. Or we're just going to focus on marking, and it's just markers, no other person within it, but it's really role specific, which I think can really help. And then you can do that obviously through small sided games, walkthroughs, the 11v11s, the small, unit practices, if you like, from there. So that can work quite well on and off the pitch, essentially.
Yeah, I think that's a great point around working with different groups on different days. I think, one of the big challenges that all coaches seem to have is finding time to work with their players on set play information. So yeah, taking smaller groups, I guess, helps manage.
Yeah. And I think it's a challenge as well, being honest, because again, like where you work in a smaller team in the WSL, where, like you said, there's not specific set play coaches, it's trying to find those moments and just how you integrate that. But especially from a defending point of view, I think, again, if you can show the importance of that, the players know the importance of that. And I think they know the importance because it's integrated in everything you do, same as everything else. And I think that has a big focus. And then I think lastly, in terms of the way that we might look at it in terms of analysis perspective, so um, we'd look at things like data. So this is kind of up to a match day. So where we win first contacts, where deliveries are, and where opposition deliveries are, you look at all that kind of data. You then try and back it up with some video and some planning. You work on some planning scenarios. You work on opposition planning. And then obviously the week up to the game, you obviously still include it within the sessions, but it might be a little bit more bespoke around the opposition if they're doing something particular that you haven't seen before, or they have a certain player or certain two players. How are we going to deal with that? So because you've had that pre-season flow and everything's been integrated, those slight tactical flexibilities should be quite easy to manage because you've got your philosophy, you've got your principles, and you're flowing towards that. And by the way, there's always challenges everywhere, and that's the joy, isn't it, when there's an attacking set play. But I think that highlights some of the things that I would like to do, and kind of a flow up to a game to obviously help aid, especially the defending set plays as well.
Great. And then one last question from me, Chris, was just these changes that you started to implement with the women's team at West Ham. How's that been received by the players?
I believe good, hopefully, if they say that. I think again, because I think again it's just important for me, no matter what, everyone would say set plays maybe 10 minutes at the end of a session. When it's at the end of a session, I feel like the intensity drops off no matter what level that is or what that looks like. So what we try to do is try to integrate it kind of maybe before 11v11. So they're defending set plays as they're going into the 11v11 game. So you can keep the intensity up, you can keep the physical load up because obviously that's a factor within it as well. And I think just keeping it fresh. So, like you said, the little unit work, playing set play games where a team has 10 corners, they have 10 corners, who's going to win? It's a competition, but you're still focusing on you. Just trying to create that element that it can, of course you want to get your points across and there's times for that, but there's times throughout the week where if you make it competitive, does that bring a sense of competitive nature to them as well? So they really want to put their body on the line to stop a ball and really win a contact. Where if you're doing walkthrough set plays, are you going to get that nature within the game as well? And add in a competition. What happens if they've got 1 minute to score? What does your set play look like? Do people panic? Do they? All those sorts of things. You try to create scenarios, and I think if you create those scenarios, it does help their engagement and it does help them understand. I think showing them this as well, and I've shared some of that data with them because I think if you share the importance with them to people and they understand why you're doing something, you get that buy-in anyway. Generically, I don't think that's different from women's to men's or any team essentially, but showing them why it's important and showing them the importance of that, I think you get that buy-in as well essentially. So yeah, I think ultimately, it's been great discussing that. Hopefully, everyone's found it useful, but I think it just shows that in terms of what I was discussing, that there is a significant impact that defending set plays can have on a team's performance and final league position. And hopefully the study can, inform coaches, staff, and contribute to some ongoing development within the women's game. And hopefully people will pick this up and criticize it and challenge it and take it further and talk about throw-ins and all those sorts of things. And the idea is just to continue to explore those kind of nuances in the WSL and explore those differences and kind of create the own path within the women's game, essentially.
Great. And last thing for me, Chris, if guys want to access a copy of your research, are we able to get that on the
Yes,
website
100.
later today?
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Yeah, I'll be confident with that, I think. But yeah, happy to share that. That's absolutely fine. And like I said, hopefully people can pick it up and take what they need out of it and progress it and challenge it and do more with it.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for your time, Chris. And as you say, like the research you've done really does ask some more questions around set plays within not only the women's game but also the men's game as well. So thanks again.
No problem. Thank you.